Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Violet Yeo, and I will be your host for today's podcast episode on smart cities. My guests today are David Harper, Vice President and Head of Public Services for Capgemini Australia and New Zealand, and our contributors from the perspectives from our Asia Pacific Junior Talents Report, Vivianne, Senior Business Analyst based in Singapore, and Julia Alftan, our consultant in Australia. For our listeners who are tuning in for the first time, this report is a compilation of opinions by Capgemini's brightest junior talents and executive leaders covering a range of the latest technology topics from 5G, artificial intelligence, blockchain, sustainability, and CSR. Welcome everyone to today's podcast. Before we deep dive into the conversation on the smart city debate, the viewpoints shared by Vivianne and Julia were rather thought-provoking. One opinion piece focused on how intelligent technology and new partnerships will create safer spaces and a new urban resilience in response to the global pandemic. The other challenged us to think about how we create an environment where social innovation and exploration are at the heart of tackling the most challenging problems faced by cities. David, welcome to the podcast. Can you please share with our listeners today your perspective on what makes a smart city? And is there a role that technology can play to deliver a better quality of life to citizens?
Thank you, Violet. It is great to be here today. Smart cities, the term has been around for some time. For me, I think the core of a smart city is a city that's connected to its people, a city that understands and is responsive to the change in demands and priorities that its people have. And those priorities span a whole raft of different services and areas, from transport to public safety to health, to simple requests for maintenance on the road outside your house. And yes, of course, technology has a role to play in responding to those demands. But for me, it's not everything. For me, as I said before, it's about being relevant to the people and understanding their priorities and their wants. And as we've seen over the last year or so, that's changed. You know, the global pandemic and how people have lived and worked in cities is changing. And maybe we'll come to that during the podcast. Thanks, Violet.
Thank you, David. That's actually a good segue to what Vivianne will actually be talking to us about. Vivianne, you talked about, or in your piece, you actually spoke about smart cities in a post-COVID-19 world. Can you tell us more details about that?
Yeah, sure. Happy to share more about this. And in my opinion piece, I actually talked about, how the onset of COVID-19 pandemic has not only fundamentally, changed the global economy and the way business operate their different works, but on a societal level, it has, forces us to rethink, what is the current way of life and how can we actually move forward in this pandemic times. And I think one thing to call out is that, this pandemic has further cemented technology's role at the heart of this transformation. What we're saying now is that, this pandemic has actually triggered and inspired new ways of interactions, sharing, engaging, and decision-making to not only ensure that, we survive, but also thrive in these critical times. Has created an, more urgent impetus for us to reimagine the current mode of living that we have now, while pushing the frontiers of the smart cities paradigm. And we have many cities around the world swiftly moving beyond just the pilot stage, of testing these smart city solutions, but moving on to fully, deploying and delivering the different tech-enabled solutions to solve some of the unprecedented challenges posed by this public health crisis. And I think one case in point that I would like to, share across with the audience today is that in my home country, Singapore, we are seeing the government recognizing the importance to speed up the whole of nation digitalization. And this actually spans across, having smart facility management, Internet of Things, IoT, to surveillance and security, being the hallmark of, some of the smart cities solutions that we have deployed in order to create, technologically advanced, safe, and livable urban environments during this time of the pandemic. And I think traditionally, smart city solutions are focused on just, enhancing citizens' quality of life and the performances of public services. But right now, we also see that, smart city solutions can double up as preventive efforts and solutions to curb the contagion. So I think another point that I want to reiterate actually comes from the Capgemini Sustainable Business Revolution 2030 report that actually mentioned that, smart city development is denoted by a shift in how cities use technology to collect and analyze data. And indeed, during the pandemic times, we actually see various technology-based, smart city initiatives that actually take on a new turn to reinvent the way how we can collect and analyze data. And one key example that I would like to share across would be, something that we have been using in Singapore to curb the contagion. And one is the Trace Together app and also the Safe Entry system that have actually played significant roles in the digital surveillance landscape during the pandemic. So the Trace Together app actually uses the Bluetooth signals to enable authorities to identify people who are exposed to the COVID-19 places and infected individuals. And then it is also used to identify the close contacts based on the proximity and duration between the users. And hence we see, how cities have demonstrated the value of, applying smart technologies to collect insights on rapidly changing events in real time. So I think ultimately, with all the rise of smart city solutions amidst this global pandemic times, I think one important caveat to take note is that in tandem with the rise of these high-tech solutions, we also need to think through what would be the data governance behind this, especially since data is aggregated from diverse sources within this new urban ecosystem. So I think Capgemini offers a full suite of privacy preserving solutions for digital contact tracing and also data analysis to assess the impact of the containment measures. And I think this is a key imperative for cities to actually work alongside compliance service providers that balances both the privacy concerns of citizens and ensuring the efficacy of the smart city initiatives. So ultimately, I think I just want to end off with the point that, the value in smart city solutions is, how technology is being used rather than, how much technologies are there in the market. And the steep digital adoption by smart cities that we see today, especially, heightened during this pandemic times, represent a step forward in fortifying the urban resilience that have far-reaching impacts that I think will continue to live in many cities beyond just this pandemic phase.
Thank you, Vivianne. Are you seeing any new trends surfacing since you wrote this piece?
Yeah, sure. So I think it has definitely been, some time since I penned down my opinion piece, which was, sometime last year. And I think, since then, I have, noticed a couple of new trends and also developed new perceptions about smart cities in today's pandemic times. And I think, on a broader perspective, I see, smart cities as more than just the physical establishment of, improving the infrastructures of the public facilities to enhance the quality of life of citizens, but rather I see, smart cities as a spirit in itself, that is adopted by governments, authorities, and also by citizens themselves to improve, and reinvent the current way of life. So I think one of the new trend that I kind of observe in my country and also in other cities is that there are indeed many bottom-up smart city solutions in relation to addressing some of the COVID-19 challenges. And I think one example of a ground-up, tech-enabled smart city initiative is that we have a young doctor in Singapore that actually developed a website and portal to help, attending doctors to translate the Bangladeshi patients, mainly from the workers' dormitories, into other translatable languages like English and Chinese, that the local doctors here can actually comprehend and identify, what are some of the symptoms and sickness that they're going through. So, because we see that, the number of COVID-19 patients were actually increasing in the past few months, especially sometime last year. And, we see that, these smart solutions involving this digital portal that actually makes translations easily accessible and available to the medical teams across the island and Singapore, and it actually helps to facilitate the governance and how the frontline workers can actually get in touch with the infected patients in Singapore. So I thought that this was a very innovative and very encourages way of how a regular citizen can actually help to partake in the building of a smart city through his or her own initiatives. So another newfound perception that I have, that has transpired in these few months is that smart city strategies actually start from people themselves and not just the technology. So I think the idea surrounding smartness is that, it's more than just installing of the digital interfaces in traditional infrastructures or streamlining of the city operations from, a top-down approach level. But it's also about, using technology and data purposefully to make better decisions and to deliver a better quality of life. And I think, the main driver behind smart cities is in fact the people ourselves who intrinsically, understands and then thereafter adopt these smart city solutions and incorporate them into their everyday lives. So while many smart solutions actually start from, very state-led, very top-down approach, such as the trace together and safe entry examples that I mentioned earlier on, to help in the techno-governance of communities, on the move. I think that, moving forward, what we will see in many cities and the establishment of smart cities is that there will be more bottom-up digital solutions to help and to partake in the smart city solution scene. As we see more citizens and individuals, being part of this innovative engagement to building a smart and resilient city. So I think, the good thing, the silver lining of this pandemic is that it highlighted the importance of public participation, and also, there are very voluntary engagement from the community itself, which I thought was pretty heartwarming, and that, instead of being disheartened by, the seemingly bleak economy and society, I think many individuals and communities are stepping up and out of the comfort zone to help, rethink and to come up with very innovative smart city solutions. So I think ultimately, with the greater participation of the public and communities, alongside authorities and the private sectors, companies, I think it also reflects, what people really want from a smart city and how they can actually, partake in it and make it a reality for themselves in building, a loyal, a resilient, sustainable smart city that entails the collaboration of the different stakeholders in the community around, trust, being innovative, and, having data insights driven solutions. All right, that's my take on my new perceptions and trends. Back to you, Violet.
Thank you, Vivian, and also for sharing some of those interesting use case. Definitely putting that into sort of perspective and into reality. Welcome to the podcast, Julia. In your article, you mentioned that the future of a smart city starts from its people, not technology. What do you think societies can do to foster innovation?
Yes, I believe the first steps in fostering innovation really starts from the people. People must be provided by an inclusive environment where no idea is really pushed down and thoughts and opinions are shared openly. Smart cities could foster this through education, promoting a life learning mindset, which really is a way to break down stereotypes through a positive psychology. Creating a positive environment that fosters curiosity and encourages exploring the unknown is one of the first steps for a person to develop into someone who can resist change, tackle the unknown, and grasp new opportunities. And I believe this type of education should start from the early learning years throughout a person's life journey. When children are being schooled, they should be encouraged to explore both of their strengths and weaknesses without setting a certain expectation. It is important for schools to break down stereotypes and explain to children that if you're not as good as someone else at a particular task or activity, it doesn't classify you as a failure. Instead, to try to encourage them to develop and grow and ask for help. This type of environment should be supported all the way until the end of learning journey and continue into professional working years. A future towards smart cities starts by providing people with the opportunities to develop, support them, and help struggling families with the assistance tailored to their needs. Even small measures such as providing families with social groups, expert advice, and helping them stay connected. It is necessary to continue to apply this logic, ensuring that a smart city truly embraces making mistakes and associated growth. In today's world, many of us still remain silent because we are afraid of making mistakes, meaning that we never truly left our comfort zone either.
It's an interesting perspective. You also talked a bit about social innovation and how smart cities can embed social innovation into their way of operating. Can you please share some instances and what this would mean for the future?
Of course. A little while back, I had the chance to travel to Indonesia to study social entrepreneurship. And what I found was that many of the world's wicked problems that have no straightforward solutions, such as homelessness, are relieved by creating a social enterprise. These consist entirely of non-profit businesses and are identified by trying to address a social issue. For example, Oregano is a social business in Indonesia that educates local farmers on beneficial farming methods so that they can sell more, provide a platform for wider distribution chains, and really lift some of these farmers out of poverty. And this concept can be also used, for example, during the COVID-19 lockdowns, where scores of people have become unemployed. Using this concept, individuals could obtain employment and become responsible for addressing a social need within the community, potentially delivering an end product that could be sold to the market. Remaining employed during this time, community members receive an income this can be used for food or rent, while maintaining connections and relevant skills to remain in the workforce. If smart cities would apply social entrepreneurship, it could lead to startups prospering as well as enhancing business sector with continual drive. It would make the city more competitive in global markets and grow investment. By encouraging local communities to tackle social problems, inclusivity and connectedness through local communities will be an evident way towards the future of smart cities.
David, we heard some interesting viewpoints from Vivianne and Julia that becoming a smart city is not a goal, but a means to an end, and that cities should be putting their citizens at the center of their initiatives. Would you have any additional comments to add and what the future might hold for smart cities in Australia or more broadly across Asia Pacific?
What an interesting discussion. I think, Vivianne talked about smart cities being a spirit in itself. I love that. I love that sort of thought. I also love the discussion around participation and how Vivianne brought that to life in some of her experiences, certainly within the last 12 months with COVID, and how new solutions have been thought up to very real and immediate problems that cities are facing. Julia also talked about innovation and creating the right environment for that participation. So I think it's been a really interesting discussion on kind of where we are today and how some of the immediate issues that the world is facing are being tackled in innovative ways and in, I guess, more in ways in which people are being asked to participate in ways they haven't done previously. I think, from my mind, technology and innovation and data and new platforms are helping us create more livable cities, smarter cities, cities that are more engaged with their populace. But for me, the really interesting question is, what does the city of the future hold? Today and over the last decades, we've seen a city where people live and work. And I wonder whether or not that will hold true if we fast forward 10 years. Yes, of course, there will be people working in cities, there'll be people living in cities, but will the same environment exist where we live on the outskirts of a city and we travel to the inner city to work? And that happens in the morning at 8 o'clock, and then the reverse happens in the evening. I think we'll see, personally, more flexibility in that work. At Capgemini, we call this the new normal. We don't think our people will work in the same patterns as they had in the past. So what will that mean for our cities? Do we still need a bus and train timetable? Or do we need to think more about mobility and people on-demand services about moving around the city? Do we still need to invest in the same road infrastructure to get people in and out of cities? What will it demand for safety and security in the city at night? Can we create more green space and more livable space within cities and within urban areas that maybe weren't possible where we were thinking about building tarmac and road infrastructure rather than space for people to enjoy at lunchtime because they're living at home or working at home? So I think there's some big questions about what the future of the city actually holds. But fundamentally, the points that Vivianne and Julia have talked about creating connectedness and participation, I think are still valid. I think, and I hope, the city of the future is different to the city that we've been creating over the last decade. And I'm very optimistic about what that will look like. I think the last 12 months have demonstrated that cities can create more active participation and some more collective decision making around how money is spent and how data is shared and how we work and live together. So I'm very optimistic about the future and look forward to that and creating the smart city of the next century. Thanks, Violet.
So thank you all for sharing your perspectives on today's podcast episode on smart cities.